My name is Malcolm Graham, Chairman of the Great Neighborhood Committee, and I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome each and every one of you to our Wednesday, September 5th meeting. This meeting is being streamed live from room 14 here at the Government Center. I want to take this opportunity to welcome each and every one who is present today, our council members. And so let's introduce council members and those who are visiting with us virtually first. And then we'll introduce those who are in the room. And we'll start with Councilmember Bakari. Welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Tarek Bakari, District 6.
Braxton Winston at large.
Julie Isold at large.
Any other council members that are visiting with us virtually? Nope, okay. Any staff members and visitors visiting virtually? Could you please introduce yourself?
Kim Graham, SOID Committee Co-Chair.
Hey, this is Mark Etheridge, Kim's Co-Chair.
Okay.
And then Julia Martin with the City Manager's Office.
Thank you, everyone. And we'll start with those who are in the room with us around the table.
Sean Heath, City Manager's Office.
Pam Weidman, Housing and Neighborhood Services. Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Okay, you have the agenda in front of you. It's relatively simple and easy today with a lot of good news to share. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sean to kind of give us an overview of the agenda, and then we'll get right into it.
Thank you, Councilmember Graham. The agenda, as you said, is very straightforward. 2 informational updates. You'll hear about status on the source of income discrimination. Team's obviously been hard at work for a number of months, building up to a report out with recommendations to council before the end of the year. And you'll also receive an update on a range of strategies. There's a lot going on associated with anti-displacement efforts, staying in place efforts, with the Neighborhood Equity and Stabilization Committee that you'll be pulling together over the next 4 to 6 weeks. You'll hear from staff today on how the various pieces of the puzzle fit together to give you some perspective on that going forward. With that, I'll turn it over to Pam for, I believe, a good news report.
Excellent. Good afternoon, committee members and guests. Committee members, you all have stressed to us over many months that we need to tell our story, tell your story of the great work that you all are doing every day along that continuum of housing. And so we want to start by doing that today. Just want to share a quick video snippet with you of some great work that is going on in the community, again, as a result of your direct investment. You all have invested money into what's now the Howard Levine men's shelter, and so you've done that through both your HTF and your emergency solution grant, and this is directly for the homeless population. And so if you would, Wendy, if you just bring up the brief video, and then we'll jump right into our agenda. Thank you.
So I am sitting in our brand new Howard Levine men's shelter. Through the generosity of the community and during the pandemic, we have built this new shelter behind our existing Lucille Giles Center off Statesville Avenue. So here we have not just a place for men to find their basic needs met, but we're going to be able to equip all of the services men need to move out of homelessness.
Amazing and a great facility to really make a difference in these men that are trying to transition to something better.
I think about the work of Roof Above. It's not just what we do, but it's how we do it. And so it is critical that we recognize the humanity of everyone who walks through our door, that we honor that humanity, and that's leaning into that value of humanity is what informs all of our work. First and foremost, our beds are all in pods. So we have bunk beds and people have just their own individual space, their own locker, just a little piece of dignity to help lessen the trauma of homelessness. We also here have offices. That might not sound that exciting, but we didn't have space previously for housing navigators and employment specialists to sit. So we've created spaces for people to meet one-on-one, as well as a learning lab with computers where folks can work on their resumes, connect to employment opportunities, as well as keep up relationships with family and friends. We have a kitchen. Again, seems kind of common, but at our Lucille Giles Center, we didn't have that. So we were every day bringing in food from our Tryon kitchen to our Statesville shelter, and then every single day taking the dirty dishes back. So here we have a place to cook, a refrigerator, a dishwasher. Makes a big difference just in terms of efficient operations as well as cleanliness and dignity.
You can tell when you walk through it, the thought that went into this, all the experiences that have been learned from other shelters, things that worked and things that didn't work, and being able to put them in place in a new building doesn't happen very often, particularly for a shelter. So it's very exciting.
The shelter's named the Howard Levine Men's Shelter for Howard Levine's incredible generosity for this project. And he's joined by corporate partners, public funders, individuals, and congregations who all came together to make this project happen.
You know, I grew up working at Family Dollar and dealt with a lot of lower income folks and had tons of time that I talked to folks, customers in the stores. And what I found was these people are just like you and I, often down on their luck. Things that might not bother you, like your car breaking down or your kid being home and you not being able to go to work. These are obstacles that sometimes prevent them from holding employment and impacting their lives. What I really like is, you know, this isn't a permanent shelter. This is where they come to get back in shape, to be able to go out and get a job and be productive in society, which is, in my view, what most people want to do. And so they just need that little help and push. And whether it's big or small, I think it all makes a difference in helping make Charlotte a better place for all of us.
Again, thank you for your continued support of along the housing continuum. So with that, Mr. Graham, turn it back to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to congratulate Roof Above for an amazing facility. They have invited me to come over next week to do a tour, so I will do that for sure. And again, you can see what the dollars that we have invested has done for our community and trying to rid ourselves of homelessness in our community, but certainly providing dignity in terms of housing right from the very start. So, Ms. Whiteman, I turn it back to you for our first agenda item. I think Councilwoman Mayor Pro Tem Iso is with us. Welcome. And we're right at the very beginning of our agenda, Mayor Pro Tem, with source of income Ad Hoc Advisory Committee updates. Ms. Whiteman.
Thank you again,
Thanks. I heard all of it, but I couldn't get my video working. Thank you.
Excellent. We wanted to provide you, when you all charged us with going off to understand the source of income issue, and you all established the Ad Hoc Advisory Committee, one of the things that you asked and that we promised is that we would update the council along the way as we're doing the work. And so that's what the purpose of this report is today. We're not asking you for any action. We just want to update you on kind of where the ad hoc committee is at this point. Many of you are aware, if not all, that the committee, you all made appointments. The committee is chaired by two very capable leaders in our community, Kim Graham, who is the executive director of the Charlotte Housing, the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association, and Mark Etheridge, who is partner at Accent Realty. And so with that, I want to first continue to thank Mark and Kim and the other committee members for the great work that they continue to do. They're meeting monthly. They have another meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. And at this time, I'll just turn it over to Mark, who's going to provide the progress report. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Weidman, and good afternoon to Chairman Graham, council members, and staff. As Pam alluded to, I'm here with my co-chair, Kim Graham, who has been gracious enough to help us lead through this effort over the last several months and work towards concluding it in December of this year. I'll start with a little bit of background. When I was asked to co-chair this committee, it was about a week or two after my second son was brought home from the hospital, and I was apprehensive about saying yes to doing it for a variety of reasons. But the reason I elected to do so was because this is impacting people and impacting people's lives and in turn impacting our community. And of all the issues we have in affordable housing, which can seem daunting and insurmountable challenges, this is really something that shouldn't happen. When we're talking about folks with vouchers and rental subsidies, we're typically talking about folks earning 30% AMI and below. And if you are one of those individuals and you're lucky enough to get a housing choice voucher or another form of rental subsidy, and you can't find housing, it's something that really shouldn't happen, because we know the majority of folks at 30% AMI and below will not have access to rental subsidies or vouchers. And in the private marketplace, without philanthropic or public sector intervention, the private marketplace yields 0 units affordable to folks making 30% AMI and below. Frankly, it yields about 0 at 50% AMI and below. And so this is an issue we need to think hard of. It's an issue that we need to work to address. It shouldn't be one of the things that exacerbate our affordable housing crisis out of the what sometimes seem insurmountable issues everywhere else, right? And so let me go through some briefing objectives. We'll work through this presentation, and obviously I think you all will be excited to ask us some questions at the end. If you can go to the next slide. So brief background, there were fair housing investigations that informed both the formation and the charge of this committee. And the result of those were, over the last 5 years, the city's Community Relations Committee has received 7 inquiries on source of income discrimination. Of the 7, there were 2 that were eligible for investigation by the CRC because they fell within existing realms of familial and disability status, which are protected classes in the Fair Housing Ordinance. 5 other cases, CRC offered to mediate, but the complaints were eventually withdrawn. And I'll present that in the light of this. Obviously, the numbers here are small, and the background that provides us is we know that the actual complaints on discrimination have been relatively minute. However, we also know that every year there are folks that have access to either a housing choice voucher or rental subsidy that are unable to find housing in their allotted time frame. We have that data from Levine. We've been speaking to other rental subsidy providers, and we know that in a series of conversations, third-party cold calls, and other survey data, that we do know that there are landlords who will not accept residents with rental subsidies or vouchers for that reason alone in the marketplace. And so we have an issue. A couple statistics just to couple with the information you see here. Per in Levine's memo on this topic, in 2019, 21% of their voucher holders were unable to find a housing unit in the allotted time they had to search. Between 2017 and 2019, there were 204 households with housing choice vouchers that were unable to obtain housing in their allotted time period. So to give some perspective on the issue and what led us to the formation of the committee and the charge, I want you all to keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So on February 22nd, City Council approved the creation of this ad hoc advisory group with the charge of developing program enhancements and process improvements to increase the acceptance of all forms of rental subsidies, including the housing choice voucher program, which is the largest rental subsidy source in this category. On April 14th, this committee was officially appointed. Next slide, please. Our charge is as follows, and I hope the background I provided is helpful in thinking through this. The Source of Income Ad Hoc Advisory Committee is charged with developing recommendations program enhancements, and process improvements that will increase the acceptance of all forms of rental subsidies, including the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the largest source of rental subsidies in our community. I want you all to pay attention to that charge very clearly and keep in mind two things. Our task is not to solve the affordable housing crisis. It's to do what this charge says. Our charge is also not to create a legal opinion of whether we think source of income discrimination should be a part of the Fair Housing Ordinance. Our charge is very simple and it's pragmatic. It's to increase the acceptance of housing choice vouchers and other subsidies in the marketplace. And I'll asterisk that and say also increase the acceptance of housing choice vouchers and rental subsidies in areas of high opportunity in our community. And so that's what we've been tasked to do. Next slide, please. So the committee is composed of myself and Kim Graham, who are the co-chairs. We also have other committee members here that represent strong, robust backgrounds in our community, leaders in their own right. We have Beverly Balcom with SL Nussbaum Realty, Clay Grubb with Grubb Properties, Dr. Moorhand with the United Methodist Church, Philip Tiegler with the Poverty and Race Research Action Council, Fred Warren with Fred Warren Realty. We've been supported throughout the process and had active engagement with both Fulton Meacham and Kimberly Cole within Levine. And obviously, we've been the beneficiaries of support from the city staff members you see here, in addition to other departments that we've used, which I'll talk about later. Next slide, please. So we have been meeting since May on a monthly basis. You can see the meeting dates that we've done. So far, as Pam alluded to, we have a meeting tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. All of you are welcome to join any of those meetings. They are broadcast on the government channel, the city's Facebook and YouTube pages. Sounds like the city's communication team has created a website where the public can access all of our meeting materials. Our meeting materials have been robust. In most meetings we've had what I would call testimony, both from Levine as well as other rental subsidy providers about the way the programs work, the success they're having in placing residents into housing, the obstacles they're facing, and frankly, the obstacles we're facing in these specific times, because the times that we're in today are not normal. Given the pandemic and the eviction moratorium, we're in a special set of circumstances today that in some ways exacerbate the issue, in some ways create some opportunities for us in the future. So it's important to keep in mind. In addition to these monthly meetings, we've broken up into two subcommittees for the last 3 to 4 months. The first is a data and research subcommittee. The second is an education and communication subcommittee. The goal for my co-chair, Kim and I, is for those subcommittees to merge over the next month with our conclusions and recommendations and spend the majority of our time, which is October to December, building upon the recommendations and metric setting that we want to ultimately turn into our report that is sent to City Council. Next slide, please. So as it relates to the work plan, as a follow-up to what I just described, the data and research team is really tasked with evaluating local and national landlord incentives, other subsidy enhancements, best practices, including the program enhancements that Levine launched last year. It's to evaluate other data to inform recommendations and metrics. And I'll say a part of this data is analyzing what sort of results we think will be yielded by some of the actions that City Council has already taken in both, mandating the inclusion mandating that landlords accept folks with rental subsidies and city-supported deals, whether it be housing trust fund or other sources in the affordable housing space. And mapping those out. We're also looking at data research and research across the market as it relates to how payment standards from various rental subsidy programs, primarily the housing choice voucher, match up to both average rent data, both at the property, census tract, and submarket level. On the communications and education side, the goal is to form concrete recommendations to increase property owner awareness and participation in subsidy programs, explored a targeted landlord outreach in opportunity areas, not mass marketing, but really a rightful approach to finding landlord relationships to expand access of housing choice vouchers and other subsidies in high opportunity areas, and help do some myth busting and stigma removal faced by both voucher holders and the programs that are trying to get them housed. And so the work of that committee is really to take a lot of the data and research that the one work group works on and figure out how to translate that into actual outreach and success of increasing acceptance of those rental subsidies both across Charlotte and more proportionally in areas of high opportunity. There's existing infrastructure in place for landlord awareness. Obviously, and Levine has been working on this issue for some time, has bolstered over the last couple of years their both communications and liaisons to landlord partners in partnering with housing choice voucher programs. And we're interested in seeing what more we can do. And so that's the task of that particular subcommittee. As I mentioned, over the next month, Kim and I will be bringing those subcommittees together to ultimately create benchmark criteria to evaluate implemented program enhancements and develop and finalize our recommendations to the council. Next slide. So what have we done? Obviously, since May, we have developed a work plan and timeline. We've created these two subcommittees, data and research and educations and communications, which have been the bulk of our work since May and will conclude in the next 30 days. We have reviewed information on what other housing authorities and municipalities are doing around landlord incentives. And it's important to note that we're lucky in Charlotte here that in Levine is a moving to work housing authority, one of only 39 in the country, which gives them more autonomy and more flexibility than other housing authorities in implementing certain program enhancements and finding ways to make housing choice voucher work better. We've conducted a comprehensive study of the housing choice voucher program and its nuances, everything from payment standards to inspection protocols to payment delivery to what happens if a tenant faces eviction, what happens if there's damage to a unit, things like security deposits and whatnot. We've also looked at the data they've sent us on the ratio of housing choice voucher residents facing eviction or becoming delinquent on rent versus the general marketplace. And it's been really useful to think about where we are, where the statistics are, how that matches up to some of the myths and stigma that are in the marketplace, and what might be assets that we could use as a part of our communications and outreach efforts to get more landlords to participate in these programs. We received information from Levine on their 2020 program enhancements and opportunity areas and tracked some of the successes they've had thus far and have thought about ways to either optimize those or complement them in other means. We've met with Charlotte Family Housing and Social Serve, which are two other local subsidy providers. So it's important for us to remember that while housing choice vouchers through Levine are the largest source of rental subsidies, they're not the only source. And so we've received testimony both from Charlotte Family Housing and Social Serve to hear about both their successes and challenges in placing folks with rental subsidies, both historically and in today's marketplace, given the pandemic and eviction moratorium. And I think one of the more exciting efforts that we've launched in the last month is creative interactive data mapping that will yield effective data and metric setting for the expansion of rental subsidies, especially in high opportunity areas. And so this is a map that not only maps where every multifamily apartment complex is in Charlotte, it also can match that against where moderate, high, and very high opportunity areas are as defined by Levine in our community. We can look at where the payment standards are of rental subsidies based as compared to average rents at both the submarket and the census tract level, and also where those payment standards relate to average rents at the property level. We can figure out who those landlords are, where the units are, where the efficiencies are, and the creases where payment standards and rents really coalesce well, and think about using that data set to form the list of landlords that we want to target our outreach to. And so, like I said, we are taking a pragmatic, data-driven approach to try to figure out where are the opportunities where we think we have the highest success of encouraging more landlords to accept both housing choice vouchers and other rental subsidies. Another piece of that interactive map that I think is interesting is a map of where all city-supported projects are, either completed or under construction. And we're going to try to generalize or approximate the number of units we think might be available to voucher or rental subsidy holders through that effort. Because I think while the data is not complete yet, I think it's worth noting that a substantial delivery of units that may be set aside or made available for vouchers or rental subsidy holders will come online through existing city efforts in the next couple of years. That will take maybe not the majority, maybe not all, but at least a substantial decrease in answering the need for identifying more families into housing, having more units available for folks with a voucher who are looking for housing. And so that's something we want to track in line with encouraging vouchers and rental subsidy acceptance in the private marketplace. Next slide, please. So that is a summary of where we are. As I mentioned, July through August was really in the thick and the meat of our two subcommittees. Our subcommittees are concluding their assignments, and our job between September and October is really to coalesce those efforts into a unified vision, which will take us through the fall in developing metrics and recommendations based on the work of those two subcommittees. In December, we need to report to full council with those metrics and recommendations. And so at this point, we're about 90 days out from that process and are really looking forward to yielding some of the fruits of our labor over the summer into concrete recommendations and metrics. And if I'm not mistaken, is that our last slide?
One more.
All right, one more. Thank you. So yeah, to go over again what I just said, we're completing the work of the ad hoc committee this fall. We're going to finalize those recommendations, and the full council will see both a final report and a presentation of our findings in December. With that, I will ask both my co-chair, Kim Graham, as well as Ms. Weidman to clarify or complement anything that I did not cover.
Well, thank you, Mark, for the update and the presentation. Ms. Graham, do you have any comments you'd like to add to it?
I don't. As usual, Mark did a phenomenal job presenting. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Ms. Graham. Again, I want to thank Mark and Kim for their work over the last couple of weeks and months. I had the opportunity to virtually slip in and watch occasionally. I don't interrupt because it's their committee and their work, but I just was keeping up with them from afar. And I think they're making meaningful progress along the way. Ms. Wyman, do you have any comments to make before I turn it over to the council members for questions?
No, sir. Thank you, Mark and Ken.
Ms. Wallington, welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to make sure that I'm clear because I know this has come up a few times. The scope of this committee's work, is this including market rate development as well? And does it also include anything that is city supported, meaning any kinds of funds, whether they're TIG funds or whatever? Can you just, I want to make sure that I'm clear about what the scope is.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, and Mark, please chime in, but Ms. Watlington, from your staff, this does include market rate, right? So we know that the largest supplies housing is for market, is through the market rate provider. So yes, this work includes increasing the acceptance of housing choice vouchers and other rental subsidies in market rate housing as well. This is already done in your city-supported housing. You may recall, I believe it was last committee meeting, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, we gave you all an update, and I think you all voted out of committee, and it'll be on an upcoming agenda about how we're doing our recommendations around source of income as it relates to city-supported rezoning and your tax increment grant financing. So that is forthcoming to the full committee.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Wallington. Any additional questions from council members relating to the presentation that Mark just gave? Any additional questions?
Yes. I guess this question is for Ms. Wyman. So Mr. Etheridge was definitely very intentional giving the charge of the committee, and I understand that. And that's kind of the form of the work. But this committee was was created out of a council discussion with the function of eradicating source of income discrimination in Charlotte. While I think with what was dealt with in the last committee, we are kind of looking at a policy approach. Are we basically saying that we think the only way to eliminate source of income discrimination is on a voluntary basis by hoping folks change their behavior, hence the focus on outreach?
So, Mr. Winston, I'll try to answer that as best as I can. you all asked us to go off and to understand if we, well, one, we did some data collection was to see if CRC had complaints about source of income discrimination. And so we got that information at that time from CRC. And then you all said in order to do, before you did an ordinance, you wanted to be able to prove if there was source of income discrimination. We didn't have the data at the time to prove it. And so you said, you gave us this charge to this committee to go and see if we could increase the acceptance. And so, and then to see if we could increase the acceptance. And so I think that is the work of this committee. When we report back to you in December, I think at that time you all can reconcile with, did this committee do its work? Do we think through the education, the outreach, the working directly with market rate owners, if we can expand the use, then you all can wrestle with, is this enough, or do you need to look at that time going further, look at your fair housing ordinance? So I don't know if that's a direct answer to your question, but our goal is, as you say, eradicating it, trying to expand the use, eradicate it through education, through outreach, through understanding exactly how many vouchers, particularly housing choice vouchers and other forms of rental subsidy, are going unused, and if there's anything that we can do about that prior to amending an ordinance, where to date, there hasn't been in this city a number of cases to suggest that there is a case for doing that. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but I hope that helps.
Long-winded answer to a long-winded question, so thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilmember Winston. Councilmember Bakari.
Thank you. Yeah, good presentation. Look forward to seeing the outcomes of this committee. I guess my only question would be to Pam and Mark. In a perfect world, I think it's a no-brainer that source of income discrimination, approaches and programs and controls make total sense. I think one of the things we've seen, though, is there are impacts to the landlords. There are impacts, both direct and kind of ancillary impacts they feel that makes it not quite a no-brainer slam dunk. So how, in your own words, do you plan, because I didn't see it too explicitly stated in kind of the framing of the objective, how do you plan, how would you articulate that you plan to take that into account and analyze that and understand what the unintended consequences of doing something could be downstream to the ultimate, inventory and things of that nature?
So, Mark, I'm happy to take a stab, and then if you, as the co-chair, want to chime in. I think there are a couple of things we're taking into consideration. One is the makeup of the committee. You can see that we have Clay Grubb, who's on the committee, has a wealth of information about kind of just housing in general, developing of housing, primarily market rate, and has done some affordable as well. You'll see we have Fred Warren, who is a real estate agent, and so it's great to kind of hear from them in terms of their area of expertise. From a financial perspective, if not tomorrow, one of our future meetings, and Mark will have more information, we want to hear from a financial expert, a developer, in terms of the impacts that housing choice vouchers either do or do not have in the market. And then the other thing, and Levine has been a wealth of information in terms of, we talked about payment standards. We know that if people aren't paid on time, that could impact the market as well. So through our work and our analysis, we're trying to look at this from different angles. And I'll stop there, Mark, and see if you have anything that you want to add to that.
Sure. Well, I think what's interesting about this is, there are a myriad of implications, right? And I think job number one of our committee is to try to separate fact from fiction. Because if you look at survey results from landlords, I think there are things that you could go in there and say, yeah, this is a tangible issue. And there are things that I think is more about stigma than it is about reality. Once you get to the components that are about reality, you have to think about what capacity do our rental subsidy providers namely in Levine, who's the largest provider, have to address these and what things might need ancillary support. So we know that programs exist in the philanthropic space that alleviate some issues, both from a process perspective and from a risk mitigation perspective. Lotus campaign comes to mind as a philanthropic effort that encourages landlords to participate by accepting very low income folks with rental subsidies. And they do a lot on the risk mitigation side as it pertains to both security deposits and damages to units and things of that nature. They have a very high success rate and a good story. We know that in a world of finite public sector funding and federal government overlays, those might not be possible in specific programs like Housing Choice Voucher, but there might be solutions to try to address them through other means. And so we're trying to look at those on a comprehensive basis. There are rental subsidy programs that today are having a success rate closer to 100%. We know that the largest source of our rental subsidy source, which is Housing Choice, is not close to 100% right now. And so what are the realistic ways for us to bridge that gap, knowing the constraints that they have and knowing what is on a landlord's mind, which is one, economic viability. Will the voucher pay the rent I expect? And then two, risk mitigation, right? What happens if something goes wrong? Who can I talk to? How can I get compensated? And so those are the things that we're going to see come out of our outreach on a very concrete basis. I think one thing that you have to appreciate is that, the market vacancy today in Charlotte is what, 3% at best, right? Especially if you eliminate new developments, which we know the rents are going to be too expensive to accept vouchers that have the higher vacancy because they're in lease up. And so if you look at stabilized apartment communities, it might be 2%. And so even if we get down to these micro census tracts where we can identify that Housing Choice Vouchers and other subsidies can pay the rent, and we get to X number of thousand of units, we know that we then have to take that number of units and multiply it by 2% to get to our available unit. And then we realistically have to think of that 2% vacancy. How many units do you think a private landlord, market rate landlord, is going to be willing to try out if they've never done it before? That's the kind of math that we're doing. Now, the good news is numerator and denominator is small. It's not 36,000 units like our affordable housing crisis. It's not 19,000 units like we need at 30% AMI. We're probably talking about hundreds of units. And so that's why we can get this granular, but it's certainly a challenge, and it's going to take that sort of micro analysis for us to get there and say, if we just solve the economic viability issue, it might yield this. Plus, we have the obstacle about landlord apprehension on risk mitigation. How could that be complemented? And whether that's something that can be done in-house through Levine's efforts of what they're allowed to do. And they have a lot more autonomy than your normal housing authority because they are moving to work designated, which is amazing. But it may take some, coordination with the philanthropic sector or the private sector to think about how else do we wrap around this issue to try to enhance that success rate. And all of that is a long way of saying, not only do we need to get the success rate to 100, we need to change the map of where vouchers are, because the map of where vouchers are right now is discouraging. There's none on the wedge, and so that's where we got to figure out where our creases last. And so I think we're looking at it pretty robustly, and we're trying to get as granular as we can. And we have dozens and dozens and dozens of survey responses from landlord that Levine has fielded. Like I said, a lot of those have tangible issues, some of those have stigma, but we really do have to find a meaningful way to address the ones with tangible issues in a way that we think can be productive and a way that can actually pragmatically get done.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I really appreciate it. I think I love the math angle that you're going to do. I think it will be incredibly helpful, and I'll ask you to put extra emphasis on delivering back to us, that fact versus stigma. I think that is a huge one, and often we don't know what to push back on and what to say, yeah, that's a thing. So a real detailed analysis coming back to us, I think will be super helpful there. But then I would just say the only thing in addition to add is really putting that focus on, for the fact pieces of it, what what's going on in the life and plight of the owner, of the renter themselves, like not the rentee, because there are reasons for this. For example, in Levine, there are Levine properties that don't accept vouchers, right? So there are obviously reasons by which this happens, and it's important for us to distinguish fact from stigma, but then on that fact, also understand what's going on there and make sure we don't, in an unintended consequence way, put ourselves in a situation where we're actually hurting the net outcome in the market itself by what we're trying to solve for.
Thank you, Mr. Bakari. Any final questions for Mark and or Kim before we pivot to the next agenda item? If not, Mark, Kim, thank you very much for the work you've done. We look forward to getting more feedback from you guys towards the end of the year. And thank you for your support and your commitment to the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Ms. Whiteman, I'll let you introduce item number 2.
Excellent. So your next topic today is we wanted to spend some time talking about the neighborhood equity and stabilization work that came out of the 2040 comprehensive plan. Again, as I start this, just again, thank you for wrestling with the Nest Commission. I know you guys are working through that. We wanted to spend some time with you today, just really highlighting what the work of Nest. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please, Wendy. The work of Nest. I want to tell you what we've been doing internally. And so if you'll just go to the next slide, I'll just go ahead and walk through the presentation. So the work of Nest, first of all, is totally aligned with this committee's work, the work of the Great Neighborhoods Committee. So it's all intertwined. You've got your Great Neighborhoods Committee. We've got city staff who obviously is doing some great work, not just in housing and neighborhoods, but in other departments throughout the city. So we want to share that with you. And then the Nest Commission that you guys are in the process of appointing. As you all know, your task here is to review and recommend policies related to creating a comprehensive neighborhood initiatives that improve our neighborhoods, right? And so the Nest Commission's charge will complement that. I believe you guys approved the charge. They will be charged with reviewing and recommending specific anti-displacement strategies. So again, it's building on the tools that we already have today as a city, and the members that you all appoint will be charged with building that toolbox so that we prevent anti-displacement or involuntary displacement in neighborhoods and communities throughout our city. And again, you'll have your city staff, as you have today, doing the work and implementing those programs. So the purpose of this presentation is kind of twofold. We want to share with you some of those programs that we already have in place, and they are many. And then as we're sharing those programs with you, as you have time to digest them, we want to hear from you about what you're hearing as you're out, as you're talking to your constituents, about ways that we can consider improving those programs or enhancing those programs. And again, all of this is going on now, and we want to just be able to add to this work when the Nest Commission gets seated. So if you go to the next slide for me, please. Let me just say, while she's going to the next slide, I'm going to be joined today by two members. You'll hear from Julia Martin, who's in the city manager's office. She's a part of the team. And then I've got Warren Wooten on hand, too, in case you have any questions about the housing programs that I can't answer. Warren and his team does a good job of implementing our housing programs on a daily basis. So as I said, we have a cross-departmental team we've established to begin work on the Nest. You can see, again, it's not just housing and neighborhood services, it's planning, it's our IT department, it's strategy and budget, it's Charlotte Water, it's obviously ED, it's general services, and again, our city folks from our city manager's office. Right now, what we're doing, as I said, is we're evaluating existing both city and county programs And we're compiling a list of gaps to see what we have now, what's working well, what can we tweak, and what we don't have, and what we might need. And again, we want to hear from you. What we've heard a number of times are two examples is tree care assistance, right? Often, if a tree falls on a house or if a tree gets unwieldy, that could cause anti-displacement. And then, obviously, addressing the energy burden, and that complements the sustainability efforts that are being led by Sarah Hazel through our General Services Department. If you go to the next slide for me, please. Just want to highlight again, focusing on NEST is not new. We have a number of programs throughout the city where we work with neighborhoods. What is new is that it is in your, it came out of your 2040 plan, and so what we're going to do is formalize the work, if you will, across departments. But again, I don't want to dismiss, you guys have long prioritized how can we help people stay in place? And so we believe the work that we have lays a really strong foundation for us to build on. If you go to the next slide for me, please. So NEST is more than housing, but yet it's a housing continuum. And again, what I want to spend some time on today, real high level, we're happy to drill down where you have questions, but again, I want to keep it high level to just to remind you all, and I know you guys know this, I know a lot about this, but just to remind you of the various programs and how they all fit together in terms of keeping people in place. So we have our homeless support. You all saw the Howard Levine Center, how you all have contributed over $800,000 to make that happen. We have our rent and our relocation program that we've had for the relocation. That's where somebody is, if people have to be displaced due to a code violation, we have a program to help them relocate. We have our housing rehabilitation program. And I'll just remind you all that several years ago, we went from just these are my words, kind of one-off housing rehabilitation, but we also went to our TLC by CLT program. Massive improvement. Examples of where we did that, we started that work in Lincoln Heights and LaSalle and historic Camp Green. We completed those neighborhoods. And that is a nice pivot into how we're preserving. So that's an example of how we preserve existing single-family housing. You all know you just did on Monday night. Your housing trust fund, both preservation, new construction, and I'm proud to say new construction, both multifamily grant from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta, where we can do create home ownership for folks earning kind of 81 to 120% of AMI, and that's valuable because you're helping people in that missing middle to obtain home ownership. And so across the continuum of housing initiatives, in FY21, we assisted about 9,500 people to the tune of about $31 million. So you all should always applaud yourself for the work that you're doing across the housing continuum and how that helps people remain in place. If you go to the next slide for me, please. Like I said, I'm not going to go into detail, but just as a reminder, on the homeless spectrum, Solutions grant. All of that money is expressly to support homelessness. So you make grants to housing providers, a roof above, women's shelter, relatives is one of our new partners to receive homeless emergency solutions grant support. You have your housing CLT, and then you have your away home rental assistance. And you all may recall the Away Home is the endowment that is in partnership with Away Home at the Foundation for the Carolinas. If you go to the next slide for me, please. Rent and relocation, again, we have our tenant-based rental assistance. We do this from our home dollars. You were doing some rental assistance prior to COVID, but you've heard many updates from Mr. Heath about how we're using our CARES dollars for rental assistance. But I do like to remind you that you've been doing tenant-based rental assistance before CARES, not just to that magnitude, because we didn't need it to that magnitude, quite frankly, prior to COVID. You have your housing opportunities for persons with AIDS and HIV. You have your emergency rent and utility assistance program. And again, this is non-COVID. You all fund every year an emergency assistance programs for us through your budget. You have your NOAA rental subsidy pilot that you did a number of years ago, and then you have your voluntary emergency relocation program. And again, Mr. Wooten is on hand to answer any specific questions about these programs that you might have. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. In terms of how you help people stay through housing rehab, I talked about the Safe Home or our rehab program. This is funded through our Community Development Block Grant. I talked about our TLC by CLT. What I didn't talk about is we pair, if we're going into a home and we know there's lead issues and there's a child under 6, that's a federal grant, so we address those issues as well. And I would applaud Mr. Wooten and his team, because what they really do is they try to, if you're going into a home to do rehab, there's lead issues, we address them all at once, because we don't want to inconvenience the property owner by having to come in their homes multiple times. The emergency repair program, you see a lot of this request for assistance through this program in the winter when an HVAC works. This is not, this program is really valuable because it is an emergency. People need their things repaired pretty quickly. So we can't go through, if you have to go through the federal procurement process, which you have to do with your CDBG dollars and your other dollars, the emergency is gone. So this is really, really valuable that we can go in and we can assist people with HVAC issues or other issues that might cause them to have to move out of their homes. And then we work with partners like Habitat for Humanity. I think many of you were able to attend one of their groundbreakings today where they're going to be building some new homes. But we also work with them through to do housing rehabilitation. And so they've continued to be a valuable partner in that work to help us get it done quickly. If you go to the next slide for me, please. Again, preservation and new construction, you have your trust fund. You're also putting in city-owned land to help with this. Dream Key, formerly CMHP, and our other developers, you have lots of partners who are helping you with both preservation and new construction. You have your home consortium, which is as a part of your allocation, there's a consortium of your partners in the county who also do this type of work, and we have to set aside a portion of our funds to give to those consortium members. They are people like Davidson, I believe, Matthews, Pineville, and so some of the surrounding towns who don't get a federal allocation like you all do. And then you have your NOAA work that you're doing. If you'll go to the next slide, I've talked about how we assist people with home ownership. What I will remind you all of, and that was a really great program that you funded several years ago through your budget, and I think we have opportunities to do more of this through our anti-displacement work, was a single family acquisition, rehab, and resale program. And that was a program where we were able to work with partners to purchase homes that were for sale in some of our neighborhoods that were gentrifying, go and acquire those homes, rehab those homes, and then resell those homes for affordable home ownership. Through the allocation that you all did a couple of budget cycles ago, we were able to acquire 13 homes, and so keep them in the marketplace as affordable housing and also rehab them. So that was a really, really great program. As a result of our House Charlotte Down Payment Program and our Community Heroes Program, one of the requirements is that people have to undergo housing counseling. That's really, really important, and it's proven to be a best practice strategy over the life of the programs. It's because people go through homeownership counseling so they really, really understand what they're getting into in terms of becoming a homeowner. And what I will tell you is that this is looking back a while, but it still holds true. People who go through this homeownership counseling, they are able to sustain their homes once they become a homeownership. So really, really valuable. You all continue to support the West Side Land Trust. This is a new tool for us. And so this is another way we're creating homeownership. And then we continue to work with community housing development organizations. Examples of this is the Self-Help Credit Union, the Belmont CDC to help create Friendship CDC to help them, those organizations create housing opportunities in and around the communities that they serve as well. If you will go to the next slide for me. So just to remind you of kind of some recent enhancements that you all have approved. We've talked about the House Charlotte enhancements. We've talked about the TLC by CLT. We tried the aging in place where we were helping people with their taxes. That kind of morphed into Nest. We have our partner in LISC. You all have approved city-owned land guidelines, and that really has proven to be beneficial in terms of using city-owned land where appropriate to help with affordable housing. You all approved some updates to the minimum housing code. I won't read these all to you, but the point is, I always like to remind the council that you guys are doing great work around currently helping people stay in place. We need to do more. We acknowledge that, but this is the foundation for where we will begin our work with the Nest Commission. If you go to the next slide for me, please. And I have to say this, and I really continue to appreciate Mr. Bakari for always bringing it up, right? Nest or anti-displacement, it's more than housing, right? It's how do we support local and small businesses, and it's also about job training and workforce development. So it can never do a presentation without including that. If you go to the next slide for me, please. This is where I'm going to turn it over to Julia Martin from the City Manager's Office to talk about, as we begin this work, we not only want to hear from you all about what you think needs enhancing, how these programs could use enhancing, and what new programs might be, but we also want to engage the community. We believe a fundamental thing in community development, and I've heard this throughout my career, and I believe it, is let's not do something to a community, let's do it with the community. Let's do it with our residents. And so this is how we're going to begin to engage the community around this Nest work. And so I'm going to stop here and invite Julia Martin to the presentation to kind of walk through this slide. And I'll come back with kind of our next steps and wrap up the presentation.
Thanks, Pam, and good afternoon, committee members. So I will speak about this relatively quickly. So if we go back to July 19th, Rebecca Hefner came to council to talk about some of our staying in place efforts, and specifically to talk a little bit about the displacement risk dashboard and the 3 neighborhoods that we have identified where we will do this work. And so we use that dashboard to identify Washington Heights, Hidden Valley, and Winterfield are the 3 neighborhoods where we will begin engaging those community members. And so, as Pam said, our next steps are to really dive a bit deeper to learn more about the households in that neighborhood, who's living inside of the neighborhood, and also ask, some questions about the actual property. So, when asking about the members of the household, it is anyone retired or disabled? Obviously ask about income, and then, to Pam's point, one of the questions we will be asking, is there anyone unemployed in the house? And so, we think that's an important thing while we are going to be engaging these people around housing. That's an important part of the equation. And then when it comes to the actual property, as Pam had mentioned, in addition to kind of the typical stuff that housing does around rehab, asking about, are there any water pipe concerns? And so we have Charlotte Water on the team, thinking about tree maintenance. So we have general services who's really engaged in this work as well. And then understanding, what are their barriers, if any, to staying in place, whether that is rent increase, maintenance costs, or maybe they just need some more space for friends and family. And so, we really want to get a kind of holistic sense about what is happening with a specific property to help guide our next steps. And then, a critical piece to this engagement is not just receiving information, but proactively sharing information where we can. And so what we will do is, if someone takes the electronic version of the survey, we will proactively, so if you check, yes, there's an unemployed member in the household, we will build a rule into the survey that will automatically send you information about job training, city job opportunities, and things like that. And so trying to make this more of a two-way engagement, between us and a household where possible. We plan to open up the survey in early October, and so in those 3 neighborhoods, there's about 10,000 households. We will be sending each resident a survey or a postcard inviting them to take a survey. We've been talking with our language access team, so taking in, maybe non-English speakers into the equation. And then we'll do an additional follow-up if needed later on. We're working with communications right now on developing those materials. Critically, one important piece, the kind of late September, early October deadline will give us some time to go in and talk to the neighborhood leaders in those neighborhoods so that they can get a better understanding of what we are doing and help be our advocates, encouraging residents to take this survey. And so, this is really the first piece to figuring out what our next steps are. And so it's more about getting a lay of the land in these 3 neighborhoods, which have some key differences. And so getting the lay of land in these 3 neighborhoods to understand how to prioritize and develop programs or a suite of program under kind of, the nest staying in place headline or overarching goal. And so that's why this engagement portion of this work is so critical. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Pam.
Sure. And just in terms of next steps, you all will be, that the commission was approved as part of your 2040 plan. This month and next month, you guys will be making nominations and appointments to the next commission. And then as soon as those appointments are made, we will work really quickly with those individuals to begin convening the next commission. If you go to the next slide for me, please. As Julia has pointed out, we're going to start the community engagement. As soon as we get that information back, we're going to evaluate and survey the survey and learn from what people have told us. And what's really important is that we'll be back in front of this group and the council to provide updates as we go along the process, because we want to continue to hear from you and also to share with you what we're learning and what we're doing. So with that concludes the presentation, and I will turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, Ms. Wyman, for that presentation. I know, council members, that that's a lot of information to absorb, but I think it speaks to the comment I made at the council meeting on Monday night, which is that despite the huge hurdle that we have in front of us in terms of curbing and reducing the number of households that we need to build affordable, that I believe that we do have the tools and the tool chest to get it done. And this is a great opportunity for us to kind of take a look at those and see which tools need to be sharpened, if any, and what tools that needs to be added. And certainly that will be part of the that we won't give that work up as well, right, as a committee, but certainly the next committee will be kind of taking a look at those and kicking the tires just to make sure that they're not flat on any of these things. The thing that I'm most, and I took my notes, Ms. Whiteman, that I really want to focus on, again, as we talked about new construction, I think that's really important, home ownership and preservation. What can we do to preserve those older homes that they won't be overshadowed by mansions? And then lastly, finding ways to help, which is harder, right? Finding ways to help those residents that live in neighborhoods that may be threatened for development to keep their homes, right? And to renovate those homes and to teach them how to profit from their homes, right? As a developer or a buyer would go into those neighborhoods and buy those homes, I think we can equip and tool and educate the residents to do it for themselves, right? And stay in those homes and increase the values of those homes for themselves. And so I think it's a great report. Obviously, the NEST committee nominations has been closed, but from my understanding in talking to the mayor, council members still can make a nomination to it. And so I share it with the whole council where we are in terms of those nominations for your review and input as we begin to nominate individuals for the NEST commission, as well as where those gaps may be seen. So please take a look at that, and if there are any more, I'm pretty sure we need to get those in like yesterday, so we can make those decisions appropriately moving forward. So I'll pause and answer any questions that are out there. And Councilmember Wallington, the floor is yours. Councilmember Wallington? Mr. Winston, we'll pivot to you and come back to Ms. Wallington. Mr. Winston?
Yeah. So I was hoping that we could have a conversation really amongst council members.
Okay.
Because I think that's what is needed here for all of these three committees, for us to think about how we work with these new groups and what we think is needed. For me, for instance, I would like to know how, being that displacement is not the I guess, ingredients to create displacement, whether it be voluntary or involuntarily, are not just subject to actions that we as the city take. It affects, is affected by the county decisions, development of the school district, this, that, and the other. So I'd like us to think about how we as a council want this committee to work across government entities and be informed about things so they can advise us on policy creation and policy implementation. How does the NEST committee best interface with the committee, and how does the committee interface with the NEST commission? For instance, like, should they be present at our meetings, sort of like the zoning committee is present at our rezoning meetings, so that we can be informed in real time of the things that we're dealing with. And again, I think from my interpretation of why council decided that this commission was necessary, it was out of the 2040 plan, generally speaking, but more in I think specifically, it was around a focus on policy development and policy implementation, and how those will affect future displacement. Particularly this was directly in response to the 2040 place type mapping and the future rezoning of the city. There were very legitimate concerns from those from constituents and they represented by council members that we have to do something that puts the citizens not just in a place where they can work with us, but advise us again on the policy creation and implementation as the 2040 plan gets implemented. So I don't know necessarily. I would look to staff to help us with that conversation, and not necessarily just telling us everything that we do, but how do we practically do something different with this commission? So I know I said a lot, but hopefully we can start having a conversation around things like that.
Point well made, Mr. Winston. Ms. Wyman, you want to chime in?
No, I mean, I would just echo that is a point well made, Mr. Winston. I mean, we do want, one of the things that I should have said, and I think it may be intuitive, is that, we want your input, right? So today was to start with a level set, just a reminder, as we go through this, we want you to share with us kind of what you're hearing and what your thoughts are about how we can do things different and continue to build our tool chest. And any policies, new policies or policy tweaks that come out of this obviously would come to you all for your input and review and then final approval. So points well taken.
Like I said, I think we've identified two particular policies, right? Place type mapping, and the rezoning and the ensuing UDO, right? Obviously we have folks, other groups, that are dealing with this, but this was specifically what the creation of this commission was for. So, like, how do we, and this was the difficulty, I think, about for us choosing some folks, right? How do we choose the people that are best equipped, we think are best equipped to carry out that task when we haven't really necessarily defined the tasks, and how the work is going to be going about. And this is something the 12 of us need to figure out, and hopefully with help from the staff to help us figure out how to go about that process of figuring it out.
No, and last thing I'll say, and I don't want to get out of my lane here, one is planning, and Mr. Jayoba are part of this process. And then on your commission, if I remember correctly, I think two of the categories speak, Mr. Winston, specifically to what you're talking about, at least in my mind. I think you were looking for an individual who's an expert in land use conditions. And then I think on your commission, you are looking for an individual, an external person who is an expert in the planning realm. I forget what all the other categories are, but again, I hear what you're saying.
Okay, any other questions in reference to the presentation from Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Bakari? Okay, so we're level setting. I think Mr. Winston outlined some questions that are similar to mine in terms of how we work together, and et cetera. And so I will work with Ms. Whiteman. I will give you a call, Mr. Winston, to kind of see how that's outlined. And I don't think we should try to solve that equation here today, but I think the staff can bring back some recommendations based on which you outline, and then we can have a broader conversation at the next meeting, Mr. Winston, in reference to what those options are and any thoughts that you have in mind. So I'm willing to continue the conversation for sure. All right, no other questions. Our next meeting is scheduled for October 20th at 12 p.m. Thanks everybody for being present today, and those in the public for watching. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.